Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Alabi.
Good morning. Welcome back. I'm Veronica Odeka.
And I'm Tundra Biola.
Our first guest is an economist and the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and has over 2 decades of public policy advocacy and business environment issues. Welcome to the morning show, MUDA Yusuf.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Yeah,
welcome.
and compliments of the season.
Same to you. Same to you. Earlier in our introduction, we had talked about the president presenting the budget this week, and we had talked about the booing and the reaction from the floor. And we wanted to just start with that first of all, of saying, as you saw that or you heard of that, what was your reaction? What did you think about it? And also, what does it say about our democracy, that process and that feedback? And if that feedback is happening on the floor, what is it like out there for people that are actually, like, how are other citizens feeling if that's actually the reaction you get from lawmakers?
Quite frankly, it was a national embarrassment. I may put it that way. Because in a sense, these are people that are occupying leadership positions in the country. And they are supposed to be role models also. Typically, we refer to the senators as distinguished senators. We refer to those in House of Representatives as honorable members. That conduct was neither distinguished nor honorable. I think even if any part of the assembly or any section of the assembly has a grouse with the president or his party, have reasons to express disapproval, I think there are better ways of doing that. We returned to democracy in 1999. That's about 19 years. And normally you expect that there should be progressive maturity in the way we manage our democratic process and in the way the actors in the space also conduct themselves. What played out did not show that we have made any progress in terms of maturity in the process. I mean, in the past, even within the National Assembly, we have seen instances where, because of disapproval with what the leadership of the assembly was doing, people just take a walkout. You just walk out of the place. That is a more decent way of expressing disapproval.
Then bringing in placards and then ripping up the placards.
You know, in fact, initially they were even talking of a boycott. That could have even made more sense. Not to go there and make the whole place so rowdy. And some of them were using languages that were really not good at all. I mean, whether we like it or not, it still is. Buhari is the president of the country. And it symbolizes, I mean, in a way, the country itself, the dignity of the country. So it's very unbecoming, and it's something that we pray will not happen again, and we pray that people will learn some lessons. It's really not good. And I feel personally disappointed that we have to express and they have to conduct themselves in the way they did.
Like you said, that was neither distinguished nor honorable.
Yes.
However, there have been some members that have been interviewed, and they've said it's part of the democratic process, and that it was important for them to express their views because they're expressing the views of the citizens that they represent. What do you say about that?
No, I don't agree. I don't. Even if, because sometimes some bad things also happen out there, outside the country. The fact that some bad things have happened somewhere does not make it a good thing here. I mean, that was not a good way. I mean, these are family people. They are leaders in many respects. These are people that the younger generation are looking up to set example. I don't agree that if we talk of democracy, that is the way to practice democracy. I think there are better ways of expressing views within the democratic process. I think there are much better ways of doing that.
Let's talk more about process. Tundu, you were going to talk more about process.
Okay, so now this is the beginning of the process. The president has presented, or he barely managed to present his budget to the National Assembly. The next stage is for the National Assembly to pass the budget. So between now and then, they're going to invite all the MDAs to do their budget defense, eventually pass the budget, we hope, and then implementation and monitoring. So how do you see this process working out this time? In view of such a stormy presentation, how likely are we to see a swift passage by the National Assembly, which will then enable the work to start? Is this likely at all?
No, well, we are going to see the kind of delays that we have seen in the past.
Of 6 months?
It could be as long as that. I say that because first, this is a political season. Very soon they'll be going on break. After the break, we have all these campaigns that will be taking place. So most of them will be engaged in all of that. So I don't see much happening between now. Maybe you should be looking at maybe March or thereabouts. I don't see much attention being given to the budget, the consideration of the budget, given the fact that they have so many political things to deal with. I mean, last year when the situation was not even as bad as this, the budget was passed around June or thereabouts. So, but the good thing, or the window, the comfort in all of this is that there is now a legislation that the budget, the timing for implementation of the budget starts to count from the day it was approved.
So the current budget will carry on till
June.
Okay.
Yes.
That is what has been agreed. So the 12-month cycle will have to be complete, irrespective of when the budget is passed. I mean, that is to accommodate all these disruptions in timing. But having said that, it's important to look at the whole budget itself. We have a budget of about
8.8
trillion.
Yeah.
The economy is about maybe 130 billion, trillion or thereabouts. So the budget is just about 5% of the total economy. I say this so that we can also be able to put in perspective how much impact we should expect from the budget on the economy. Because the smaller the ratio, the lower the impact. In many other climes, the percentage of budget to your economy, or what we call the GDP, is between 20, 30 to 50%. The percentage of this to GDP is just about 5%. So we need to moderate expectations. So we should not expect too much
from this.
Because I've listened to a lot of people year in, year. In fact, I've heard some people say they are even tired of listening to the budget because they don't see anything concrete at the end of the day. It's because of the size of the budget vis-a-vis the size of the economy. It's like getting a goat to push an elephant. There's very little impact that we make. So that is a very, very fundamental thing. So it is important that we grow the size of the budget so that there can be more impact. And one evidence of all this weak impact is what you see in many of the MDAs or in many of the government institutions. Anywhere you go, they say that they don't have money. Even the police, which is a central or cardinal responsibility of the federal government. If not for the intervention of the states, many of the police formations across the country will have been something else. Many of them have to rely on the states for logistics, for vehicles, for community, for a lot of things. In fact, in some instances, even some subsidy in terms of allowances. So this shows the kind of challenges we have with respect to the capacity of the government to fund the operations of government. The same thing if you visit public hospitals. Go to Lut or go to Ibobi. And we have all that around the country. You can see how dilapidated the facilities are. So I've seen ASU now going on strike because of facilities in schools. So a lot of things are breaking down. So we need to look at the structure of the economy fundamentally and ensure that you have the resources to make this economy and this country to function properly.
Based on what you're saying,
Yes.
I mean, the biggest concern also, one of the first things that jumps out at you at the budget presentation was the fact that the president called this a budget of sustenance. This is lower than last year's budget. And you're now, I mean, based on what you're saying, is this, when you look at the size of the budget and the impact of what we can expect, which will then explain why people have not seen a demonstrable impact currently. And that's why there continues to be a huge pressure on the economy. Why and what needs to be done in other areas when it comes to revenue generating and growing the overall size of the economy to actually sort of resuscitate this economy? Because right now, everything is part of the other. Everything is interrelated and interdependent. If you don't have a decent budget, you can't make a decent impact. You have public infrastructure, even though right now, one of the biggest parts of the budget is going to infrastructure and transportation. But at the same time, our infrastructure is falling apart every day.
Exactly.
So at the end of the day, what does this administration or the next administration or whoever needs to do to grow the overall size of the economy so that we could actually have budgets that make an impact and not a sustenance budget?
You see, when we talk about the sustainability of the entire system, you look at your cost, you also look at your revenue. The cost of governance is too high in this economy. The cost of governance is too high. Now, the recurrent expenditure is about maybe 4.7 trillion, thereabouts. The total budget is about 6.9. The total revenue is about 6.9. The current expenditure is about 4.7. Debt service is about 2.14 trillion.
It's 69%. Recurrent expenditure and debt service together, 69% of the budget.
Now, we have a situation now on our hands where the recurrent expenditure added to the debt service is equal to the total revenue.
Pretty much, yes.
It's equal to the total revenue.
Yeah.
So that means all the revenue you have
It goes straight back.
goes straight into debt service and recurrent.
Yeah.
How do you now build infrastructure? How do you build infrastructure? So that is why we have to rely on borrowing year in, year out. And how sustainable is that?
Let's talk a little bit about the implications of borrowing at the rate that we borrow and also servicing at the, I mean, when we're using 24% of our budget to service that.
It's not sustainable. That is it. It's just not sustainable. It's like digging ourselves deeper into a hole. And if you are not careful, it will get so deep that it will be very difficult to come out of the hole.
In which then people are saying that some of the gains that the president mentioned around the reserves are obliterated by the fact that you're servicing this debt and you're borrowing. What do you say about that? What's your input on that?
No, you see, the fact that you have a reserve that is fairly robust, it's not so much because we are doing anything fantastic in terms of managing the economy. We are just lucky that oil price has been fairly up there.
There's been a rebound in oil prices.
Yeah. We are just lucky.
But it's still not
Then
as high.
the outputs again
Has stabilized.
has stabilized.
But
Thank
it's
God
still
for
not
what.
as high as the assumptions. The oil price is $60.
Of course, we still come to discuss the assumptions,
Yes.
how realistic the
Yes.
assumptions are. But the point I'm making is that when we talk about these reserves, it is because of these two variables. Because right now, the total revenue, oil contribution to total revenue is about 52% or 53%. So what that tells us is that if there is any shortfall, any drop, significant drop in oil price, as we are beginning to see,
Yes.
Yes.
and if there's anything wrong with the output, the whole system again will collapse.
Yes. It's a precarious position.
It's it's a major crisis, I must say. Coming back to the question you raised about what we need to do about revenue. First, I mentioned the fact that we need to watch our cost of governance. That is very important. The size of the bureaucracy and the size of our political appointees and the kind of remuneration that they take. That is one very important variable on the cost side. Because if you are talking of sustainability of a system, you look at both the cost and the revenue. So we need to deal with that. Secondly, we also need to look at what we call the independent revenue. In this budget, I noticed that the assumption or the projection from independent revenue has to be brought down. It used to be about 800 billion, now it has been brought about 600 billion. And the independent revenue are revenue that comes from the revenue-generating agencies of government. Some of these agencies have the capacity to generate huge revenue, and some of them are indeed generating. But how much of that revenue is going to the Federation account? Because you have agencies like the NNPC, like the CBN, like the Nigerian Communications Commission, like NIMASA, like Nigerian Port Authority, quite a number of them like that. They're generating huge revenue.
And FIRS.
FIRS, of course, statutory, that's his responsibility. But how much of that is going to the Federation account? Even to get some of them to present their budget to National Assembly was a big issue.
Yeah.
So my own question
you see, there are a lot of issues around that, and there has to be political will to compel these institutions to remit what they are supposed to remit.
So that was the question I was going to have for you, because at the end of the day, we get a lot of people that come on the show, such as yourself, highly intelligent, that know their work, and they're telling us this is what needs to be done. We're facing a crisis, we're looking at the situation, and yet nothing gets done. So it's almost a situation of not what really needs to be done, but how do we compel them to get the work done so that this money is put back into the Federal Reserve? So that
it's a governance issue.
To solve the problem.
It's a governance issue. When many of them were refusing to even show up at the National Assembly to defend their budget, it took the intervention of the president himself. He should not get to that point. He should not get to that point. Yeah. So that is one aspect of it.
One of the things, though, and just before you go on this, is when you talk about revenue, when you talk about increasing revenue, one of the conversations that was also had during this presentation was the introductions of new taxes and increasing taxes, and also Nigerian port authorities was also brought up around their revenue generation and also making sure they're more efficient and remitting more revenue. When those conversations are being had around new taxes, I think that was also another area where people started booing heavily. Do you think what Nigeria needs today is more taxes, or do you think that what we need today is efficiency around these revenue-generating organizations?
No, I think it's about efficiency. It's about efficiency. And let me tell you, there is no way you can grow revenue in an environment where investment is not growing. Because primarily, those that should give you the tax revenue, apart from these MDAs that I talk about on the private sector side, are the investors. And the investor can only give what they have. You pay tax on profits.
Investors in businesses, growth of businesses, growth of the private sector.
Exactly, investors generally.
Because a lot of times when people say investors, people on this show, people are either thinking of FDI or portfolio investors. Just so you're specific when you say investors.
When I'm talking about investors, I'm talking primarily about domestic investors.
Fantastic.
Whether it's an SME, medium enterprises, or large enterprises. I'm also talking about foreign investors that are here. We need first to create an environment for existing investors to be able to grow. Because it's only an industry that is doing well or a business that is doing well that we pay taxes and pay good taxes. We also need to create the environment for more investors to come in. Look at the oil and gas sector. The PIB has been in and out of the National Assembly for over 13 years. And this is a critical piece of legislation or bill which we need to unlock a lot of potentials for investment in the oil and gas sector. But because of some narrow interests here and there, this thing has not seen the light of day. And yet you can get huge sums of revenue if you create the right kind of environment in that sector. And you can replicate that in many other sectors. So you need to grow investment for you to get more revenue. Revenue is not about increasing taxes. Already as we speak, many investors have been pushed to the limit in terms of taxation. Because it is the same people who are paying the tax that you keep flogging year in, year out. Some of them have to pack up their businesses and go and buy treasury bills. When you buy treasury bills, of course, there is no tax.
When you say
it's risk-free.
Yeah.
So
sorry. When you say
issues.
that, when you talk about the case of investors and how investors have been treated, one of the things a couple of weeks ago we had an economist on the show, and one of the examples they gave was the relationship with MTN. I would like to understand what you think about the MTN tax issues, how it was handled, and what do you think what message does that send to other investors that can come into the economy?
You see, investment is about confidence, especially if you want long-term investors, investors who will be here to stay. I'm not talking about portfolio investors. It's about confidence. The way our regulators conduct themselves has a lot of impact on the confidence of investors. The way the MTN thing was handled is not the kind of thing that gives the right kind of signal to investors as to how comfortable you are with the regulatory environment. Because the regulatory environment is very important. You don't just wake up suddenly and now realize that something that was supposed to have been done 10, 8, 5 years ago is not that you bring. No, it's not tidy. So the regulators have a responsibility to ensure that they create the environment that inspires confidence. Because those who want to bring their capital into this economy, they look at what is happening on ground. And you are dealing with an economy, you are dealing with a government, a system where you need resources. You don't have the capacity to generate the resources. And there's a limit to which you can continue to borrow. So you need to create an environment to attract investors and to encourage those who are on ground. You have to deal with issues of policy. Regulatory environment has to be right. Your tax policy has to be right. Your investment policy has to be right. Your institutions must be investment friendly. You know, these are the things that must happen. Because there's a relationship between investment growth, GDP growth, and even revenue growth. Unless you deal with all of these things together, there's very little progress you can make. So the administration, this administration, and whoever administration is called, have to recognize this very important thing. It is the investor that will generate the revenue. It is the investor that will create the jobs. I mean, look at what is happening to unemployment. There's a limit to which the government can employ anybody. I mean, government has even reached a saturation point as far as employment is concerned. So it is the private sector that will create it. But what kind of environment are you creating? You know, these are very fundamental and critical issues, you know, through which you can deal with the looming fiscal crisis that we have on our hands.
Looming physical crisis.
Yes, yes. It's a crisis, really. Because if you cannot fund your system, it's a major crisis. And the president, even in his presentation to the National Assembly, underlined that particular issue with emphasis that they have a major problem. But they should also demonstrate a clearer understanding on how to fix these things. And it's something that can be fixed.
Let's talk about the assumptions, all the benchmarks, the $60 per barrel, 2.3 million barrels per day. How realistic or otherwise?
No, those things are not realistic.
And also the budget is, the budget currently now is done, it's done on a basis of $1 to 305
yes.
naira.
First, the assumption on the oil price, already oil price even below that, so that's clearly unrealistic.
But global projections,
$56.
global projections for the next couple of years are ranging between it's a $10 range. That's sort of what some of the projections are. But obviously, you don't go with the high end of that as your benchmark.
If you are talking of revenue, you have to be very conservative.
Fair enough.
So that you don't put something in place that you will not be able to sustain. If you now have something above that, it is easier to manage rather than raise expectations at the beginning, and you are not able to meet those targets. As we speak, even in the 2018 budget, revenue shortfall of almost 40%. So now you have, of course, that is not realistic. Even the output itself, it doesn't look too realistic. I mean,
yes, the oil production right now, we're on 1.9.
1.9, I think if you put it at 2, that would be more like it, rather than say 2.3. And the assumption of 305 exchange rate, where do you get that from? Well, we know that the exchange rate is 360, 362, 363. And the implication of that for revenue, which is another shortcoming in the budget, is that it understates the Naira revenue that goes into the Federation account from our dollar earnings. Because if you are converting at 305, there's already a shortfall of about 15%. Rather than if you convert at 360. All these things also impact on the revenue that will go into the Federation account.
And also your expenses, because if you're underestimating your revenue, you're also underestimating how much your expenses are going to be.
Exactly. These are and I mean, I don't know why we have to use 305.
That doesn't make sense.
It makes no sense.
We haven't had 305 in...
Why 305?
It doesn't make sense. So that if anybody is now accounting for the dollar revenue, they'll be accounting to us on the basis of 305, rather than accounting to us on the basis of 360.
Is that revenue shortfall at 305 not an extra buffer for the government in case oil prices don't change?
It's not. If it's a buffer, it has to be declared. It has to be declared. So why do you have to say that it's 305?
It's not always declared, though.
Well, I don't know how, but it is better for purpose of budgeting that you put it that the exchange rate is 360. So that whatever dollar income, I mean, 53% of the revenue is oil. So that means that 53%, you have to reflect it on 360, not on 305. So that you don't also shortchange the Federation account. All those things are key.
Let's talk about the inflation, the inflation projection as well for the budget. Right now, according to the budget, the projection is 9.98. We know that inflation over the last year has been more like 15. Where and how do you think the government came up with this inflation rate?
Well, I think it's better to ask them. Of course, because they are the author of this.
Yes.
But for me, I don't think projecting a single-digit inflation, I don't think it's realistic.
Do you think that it almost felt like that's what they were trying to do, was get into that single rate of inflation, single-digit inflation rate, rather than looking at the current inflation market indicators?
No, I mean, that is what the government has been trying to do. That's what the central bank has been trying to do. Because, I mean, at every meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, there's always this tightening of monetary policy. CRR is very high, liquidity ratio is high, all sorts of things to ensure that we moderate inflation. And even in spite of all of that, inflation, in fact, right now, inflation is actually going up gradually. So projecting single-digit inflation, to me, I think is a bit optimistic.
What about
we have to also realize when we talk about inflation, because I've heard people said prices are not going down. Inflation, by definition, is the rate of increase. If you say that inflation is coming down, it doesn't mean that prices will come down. It is the rate of increase that is coming down. In other words, if you had an increase of, say, 5% last month, and you have an increase of 2% this month, you say that inflation has gone down. It's not that the price at which you purchase this barrel is coming down. So we have to have that understanding. Secondly, it's also important to realize that the cost environment is a major factor also in inflation. It's not just a monetary issue, because I've seen that most times there's a lot of effort on the monetary side to tighten monetary policy, push up interest rates, reduce liquidity, and create all sorts of problems of access to credit in the economy. But we have to deal with the issue of the cost of transportation, cost of logistics, cost of power. All these things push up prices. And if your prices are high, you cannot sell below what your cost is, unless you want your business to go under. So it is important in addressing issues of inflation to look at these fundamental drivers of inflation, particularly on the cost side. It's very critical.
What about the projections for growth in GDP, 3.01%?
Well, that's also very optimistic. Because right now we are doing about 1.9.
We're at 1.17. Well, 1.17 year on year.
Yeah, no, I'm talking of GDP.
Yes.
I think it's
about
1.9. It's about 1.9. It's 1.9. And I think the best we have done in recent times is around. In fact, for a long time we have not even done 2 point something. I mean, so I think to be talking about 3, I think is also very optimistic. But in any case, what bothers the average man on the street? It's not all this, whether GDP is 3 or 4%, or whether this inflation is this. It's the welfare of the people. How do you make life better? How do you fix your infrastructure? How do you make food cheaper? How do you create access to health service? How do you make it easy for the average person to send his children to school? These are the basic things, really, that the man on the street worries about. And for those of us in business,
how has the budget addressed that?
You need funds to address it. If you don't have money, how do you fix it?
But at the end of the day, I understand that that's what the average man on the street is concerning themselves with. But at the end of the day, the lawmakers and the policymakers have to look at the macro economy for the people on the street to actually feel any effect. When you're looking at this budget, what is going to happen to this budget? Because literally, there feels to be a lot of fallacy in this budget based on just some of our conversations, based on the initial response to this. So if the macroeconomy indicators are not really aligned, nothing's going to happen to the man on the street. So what's going to happen to this budget? Because this budget doesn't even seem to be in line with what is possible.
Well, part of the things that will happen is what we have been discussing. Because the macro side of the economy is a function of what is happening, for instance, to exchange rate. Now, the economy is still not diversified. The economy is still not diversified. 53% of revenue is coming from oil. If anything happens to the oil sector today, all this macro systems.
The budget is a failure. I mean, the budget collapse, yeah.
It will crumble. Because it's like an economy that is standing on one leg. So the point is that we need to ensure that the economy is diversified to have the kind of macro.
How do you diversify this economy? Because we've been saying
you see, diversification of the economy is a function of the environment you create for it. Because it is investors that will diversify the economy. But it's not the government.
But the government believes that they're making a lot of headway in the ease of doing business. Nigeria has gone up 24 places in the last couple of years, from 169 to 147. But once again, what does that mean?
Those things are good, but they are not deep enough. I just told you about how we have failed to put legislations in place to bring about investment in the oil and gas sector. Our refineries are not functioning. That is not a question of ease of doing business and restriction of business, construction, but that is not the issue. We have to deal with fundamental reform issues. How can you have an economy, an oil-producing country? Now we have budgeted $1 billion for petroleum subsidy because our refineries are not functioning. Investors are not coming to that sector. Imagine how much investment we will unlock if we have a PIB in place by now, both in the upstream and the downstream. We can be talking about multiples of this budget if those investors are already on ground. But they are not on ground because the policy environment is not there. And when we talk about diversification, we are talking about even diversification within the oil and gas sector space. Look at how much revenue we are getting from Nigeria and LNG. A lot can happen in the downstream. A lot more can happen in the upstream. And we can have multiples of income from that. But what has happened? We have been stagnant as far as reforms are concerned. Just because, I don't know whether some people are just comfortable with the status quo. But the national economy is suffering as a result of that. So we can unlock a lot of investment in that. And when you have money, you can fix your infrastructure. And you can also create an environment where even the private sector can bring in their funds to help you fix some infrastructure. Some of these infrastructures are bankable. If it is bankable, it means that private capital can come in. Because the government cannot fix everything.
Exactly.
So you identify those ones that are bankable, bring in local or foreign investors to help you to fix them at no cost to you. And once they are making money, they will even pay you tax. So when we are talking about diversifying the economy, these are the fundamental issues that we need to deal with. It's not just about whether GDP, agric is contributing this to GDP. That is not the issue. You need revenue to power an economy. And you have to put policies in place. The institutions must be in place to be able to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
being here today. We have to have you back. And I mean, I think these are the conversations that need to happen around the budget. And who knows, hopefully there'll be some changes.
Some change, some good change.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for being
We
here.
appreciate having you on the show, and
My
definitely, like
pleasure.
you said,
Thank
we'll
you
have you
very
back.
much, yeah.